25 years ago in New York, Alexander Graham Bell repeated the first words ever transmitted by telephone.
1883,
Mr. Watson, come
famed
here, I
inventor
want
Thomas
you.
Edison
But this time the
struggled with
inventor's
filament
assistant was
breakage
asked.
in his many
I
attempts
can't
to
make it
invent
under a
a
week, Dr.
sustainable
Bell.
incandescent
I'm in
light
San
bulb.
Francisco.
In this
Observing that the
operation, we
breaking
see a
invariably
woman
occurred
putting
at the positive
the
end of the
vacuum
filament,
tubes
Edison
into
A few
these
years later,
holders,
two
which
scientists,
from what
Dr.
they say,
Arnold of Bell Telephone Laboratories and Dr. Langmuir of General Electric, working independently.
Everything, but it turns out these structures are necessary to make this thing work, and you can't see through them. So here we are on the CT scan, and now you can see what's really going on inside this tube.
When it comes
So
to
here you can
sound
see
quality,
the
audiophiles swear by
sealed
amplifiers which
and
contain
so
vacuum tubes to boost and modify the electrical signal. They were the norm until transistors came along in the 1950s. Many audio enthusiasts still prefer tube sound, which they find warmer, richer, and more natural.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Cynthia the Audio Belle. For those of you already familiar with the Schiit Freya Plus and their LISST, you're probably wondering why the Absolute Sound is reviewing these products now after they've already been out for a few years. My boss made me do it. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Freya Plus and the LISST, the Freya Plus is Schiit Audio's preamp, or one of their preamplifiers. This one in particular handles both tube and solid state. And the LISST are Schiit Audio's linear solid state tubes. Now you're probably wondering to yourself, how could that possibly be? And before you get too skeptical on me, hear me out. Schiit Audio hasn't been known to use marketing gimmicks. They are a bunch of nerds who really enjoy engineering, technology, and just listening to music. If you haven't seen my interview video of Jason Stoddard at the Texas Audio Roundup a couple years back, you can find that on my YouTube channel, The Audio Belle. I also captured his reaction to the Magnepan prototype dipole woofers, which was really fun, and he just was a super down-to-earth guy. Now, as for what's underneath the hood of the LISST, well, there's plenty of resources online that talk about what makes these magical cans call themselves tubes. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about what's behind the black box, because I know all too well that when a magician reveals his tricks, well, they're not so magical anymore. So if you're interested, I'll give you a breadcrumb. That Schiit Audio's website tells you a little bit about what's underneath the hood of these solid-state tubes, and you can go and deep dive from there if you'd like. Now, a lot of people say that this particular technology can sound really similar to tubes, so similar that some people can't tell a difference. And then there's other people online that you might find if reading about this product that say that they can totally tell a difference. So I'm going to provide you guys with both my subjective review as well as my objective review so that you can get kind of an idea of what I can hear as far as differences between regular tubes and the LISST, or maybe what I can't hear. And I'm going to show you guys measurements that I took of the differences between the two, as well as measurements that I took for their solid state side of the preamp as well. And I think you're going to be really shocked by what I found as far as measurements go between the LISST and the 6S and 7 tubes. So stay tuned for that later in the video. Now to talk about the Freya Plus. The Freya Plus is a preamp, but it's not just any preamp. This preamp offers 4 different configuration modes and options for you as the consumer to be able to enjoy listening to your music with. I think it was actually Steve Guttenberg that first talked about the Freya Plus with the LISST as far as that configuration goes. The 4 different configurations are as follows. You have vacuum tube mode with vacuum tubes installed. You can have vacuum tube mode with the LISST installed. And then for the solid state side of the house, you have passive mode, and then you have differential buffer mode. You can easily switch between these different modes with the press of this button on the Freya Plus itself, or by using the supplied remote control. And speaking of the remote control and the front panel icons, I will say that coming back to the Freya Plus after not listening for a bit, I always get confused on which button does what, and the symbols are a little bit difficult to understand. Otherwise, the controls are quite simple, and I like that. So the Freya Plus is actually my husband Jeremy's preamp. He had purchased it before we got married, and when we got married, it became part of our combined audio file system. And after listening to it for a few years now, I will say that it's really hard to compete with for under $1,100. Depending on which configuration you get, I'll just say under $1,100 because you can get different tubes that may cost more or less, or with the LISST, or with no tubes if you plan to use tubes that you already own. I think it really could be your end-all, be-all preamp, and you would never have to upgrade. Now, it's rather difficult for me to say what the most important piece of audio gear in an audiophile system is, because any weak link in the system could be the demise of the sound. But I will say you can bring the best out of a cheap pair of speakers with expensive or great gear upstream from the cheap pair of speakers. And you can bring the worst out of a fantastic pair of speakers with bad gear upstream from them. My personal opinion, I find the preamp to be very important when it comes to the way I want something to sound. I would almost compare preamplifiers to microphones in that way, because with microphones, you could have a tube microphone that makes a female voice sound pure and angelic. And you can have a microphone that really picks up the low tones of the male voice and amplifies them well. There's condenser mics and dynamic mics. Each of them capture sound differently and output it differently, which changes the coloration. Some of these coloration differences are measurable, and some of them are not. What I've learned over the years of listening with different preamplifiers is that they can really have a significant impact on the way your music sounds. For instance, I have a Pass X2 preamp that's 30-something years old, and I really like to listen to that when I want some oomph on the bottom end. And from what I can tell by listening, I really like the slam effect that it has. On the other hand, the Schiit Freya Plus just provides these qualities of realism that in some ways are superior to the Pass X2 preamp. Now, I would say that the Freya Plus isn't quite up to par with the Pass as far as its solid state qualities, even for a 30-something-year-old preamp. When I was enlisted as a reviewer for the Absolute Sound, Tom Martin explained to me that the Absolute Sound's reviews should not compare one piece of gear to another, but rather we are to compare gear to the Absolute Sound. What we would hear at a concert, or sounds or music we would hear in real life. And that is exactly what the Freya Plus accomplishes. By the way, I think this has to be my favorite feature. It has the most annoying and yet satisfying sound at the same time. And then for like the Freya Plus, turning the dial and you hear that little clicky sound.
Yeah.
That's beautiful and annoying at the same time.
Yeah. The sound does drive some people completely insane, but I love the clicking.
I like it too.
You get used to it.
Okay, so I spent weeks listening to the Schiit Freya Plus with all kinds of different configurations, including other speakers and other preamplifiers I swapped in and out. Again, not comparing gear to gear, but comparing gear to the Absolute Sound. So what I did was I actually attended a couple of concerts so that I could compare what I was hearing in my living room to the Absolute Sound, which I'll get to later in the video. So initially I had paired the Schiit Freya Plus with my Magnepan 3.7i Magneplanar speakers and a subwoofer, but in the end, I decided to go with a pair of DIY open baffle speakers that my husband Jeremy built from a DIY design called Bitches Brew after the Miles Davis album of the same name. We also ended up purchasing a mini DSP 2x4 in order to do some EQing. And after breaking in my ears to the new setup so that I could forget the old, I was able to begin. I listen to a wide variety of different types of music, from orchestral music to Bollywood music. I listen to acoustic music, for example, Rebecca Pigeon, worship music, reggae. Mainly, I was trying to get a feel for this product by trying out all sorts of things. Now, before I actually get into the differences in what I heard comparing the LISST and the vacuum tubes to live music, I want to tell you guys how the product made me feel when I listened to music that I love. The first song I listened to was I Am Moana from the Disney movie Moana. That song immediately gave me chills. I migrated to some Lindsey Stirling music because Jeremy and I had actually planned on attending her concert in August, and I wanted to start figuring out what I needed to listen for. At first, her music seemed pretty unrealistic because it sounded like there were a lot of electronic instruments in the tracks. But the music was so energetic that it made me tap my pen on my notebook as I was doing this review. And before I knew it, I was dancing in my seat. Folks, that's really what it's all about. If when you're listening to music on your audio system, you start tapping or dancing, or it solicits some emotion like laughter or crying, then that's really what it's all about. As far as audible differences go, my husband Jeremy and I attended a Lindsey Stirling concert at the Oklahoma City Zoo Amphitheater about 1 to 2 weeks after my first listening venture with the Schiit Freya Plus and the LISST solid state tubes. And if you ever get the opportunity to go to a Lindsey Stirling concert, then I would definitely recommend going, because there was really nothing like it. She is a dancing violinist who does acrobats on stage. She's got a dancing dog. She does a little bit of a comedy show.
This feels amazing. Like a little windstorm up here. Maybe a little much. That's perfect. Okay. Okay. That really feels so nice. You guys gotta try this. Holy cow. I'm gonna spend the rest of the show right here.
And gives life advice all while putting on this concert, which is just absolutely amazing. And one of the cool things that I really liked was that she actually got on stage with the opening band to play a song with them, which I thought was really nice. And she had some of the opening band members come play songs with her during her portion of the concert. One other thing that she did that was really cool was she actually, for each state she had a concert in, she had a contest to have somebody who was a YouTube star. I say YouTube star loosely, somebody who wanted to be an up-and-coming YouTube star that played an instrument, get up there and play their instrument with her, and told everybody to subscribe to said person.
To look for you, how can people find you? Preston Lee Music on Instagram or YouTube.
Preston Lee Music. Okay, Preston, are you ready to do this?
I'm ready.
I just thought she was super fantastic as far as her entertainment factor goes, but as far as the sound, which is what we're really concerned about at a concert, the sound at the concert was horrible. The low end was way over accentuated and almost matched her violin, which was really unpleasant. And I wasn't sure if it was the venue or the particular sound system or sound people there, and if that's what all of her concerts would sound like. I definitely would give it another chance if maybe it was at an indoor venue next time. So I had to work with what I had, and at least it had given me a rough idea of what I needed in order to compare to the absolute sound. At the concert, I promptly purchased a copy of Lindsey Stirling's LP called Artemis, and I took it home and started listening. And one of the fun things that Jeremy and I ended up doing was we bumped up the bass on our system in order to try to match what the concert actually sounded like. And we were successful in doing so, but we didn't leave it like that, of course.
Just a brief interruption, esteemed viewers. As you may know, I'm Tom Martin, Chief Content Officer of The Absolute Sound. We have a new product. It's on the Substack platform, and we're going to do some interesting things with Substack. First of which is reader questions and answers. Each Monday, readers will submit questions, we'll pick the most interesting ones, and we'll answer the questions on Friday. We'll also have early access to articles and special blogs that don't appear anywhere else. We hope you'll join us. It's only a cost of a cup of coffee per month. Just check on the screen or in the show notes below. Thanks, and now back to the show.
So as I mentioned initially, I had thought that a lot of Lindsay's tracks sounded artificial as far as the electronic instruments go. But what I learned at the concert was that all of those sounds were real. They were achieved by a drum kit and a keyboardist. Simple as that. So I started with the LISST and the Freya Plus on side 1A of Artemis, and I did a ton of ABA testing to the point where the music on side 1A was ingrained in my head and it wasn't going anywhere. And I ABA'd the LISST versus my 6S and 7 tubes. First impressions were that I heard a bump in the mid bass that reminded me of that tube-like sound. And the violin sounded clear and it sounded gorgeous. It was really easy to pick out the highs versus the mids. The cymbals were actually warm and drums had a great slam effect with the LISST. There's a song on the album called Between Twilight, and when that track started, the violin at the beginning sounded like it was being painted on by a paintbrush. Now, I had some issues initially when I first started using regular vacuum tubes. The vacuum tubes Jeremy had purchased as premium tubes initially with the Freya Plus had one that was going out. He had that problem initially not long after purchasing the Freya Plus back in 2019, but when I hooked it up recently, all 4 of the tubes worked. After listening for a while, the same tube started to go out again. I ended up rolling tubes to 4 others, 2 of one brand and 2 of another. Now, Jeremy had mentioned to me that he had issues mixing tubes before of different types. I say different types. It was the same type, but different brands. And that he had to match 2 tubes for a set of sockets and the other 2 for the other set of sockets. What made this difficult was when I was trying to recreate what he had did back in 2019 was that the PCB board is actually a little bit confusing on the labeling, and everything I found online was confusing as well on which sockets have to match and which other sockets have to match. And Schiit Audio doesn't really recommend mixing tubes in the first place. They recommend having all 4 be the same. They even have on their website that if you buy their product, you agree to basically use tubes that only they recommend. My recommendation based off of that would be to do what they say and use all 4 of the same tubes and make sure that it's something that they would support, at least while it's under warranty. And then at that point, it's at your own discretion. In the end, we ended up ordering 4 more tubes that were matching because 2 of the 4 tubes that we were using went out and died. So I don't know what happened with that, but it was interesting. Now, when we got our 4 new vacuum tubes in, I was able to install them and actually start listening. Before the 2 that went out had taken a nap, I was listening with them and comparing with the LISST to the absolute sound. And at that time, I actually thought that the LISST sounded more realistic to music and sounds that I would hear in real life. Now, after rolling in the new tubes, I had the complete opposite reaction. I actually thought that the LISST kept up with the vacuum tubes and had no problems doing so, but that there was just a slight difference and the vacuum tubes sounded more realistic at that point to what I would hear compared with the absolute sound. And there were only a few factors that really put the tubes over the top compared with the LISST. It took a lot of listening to the same songs over and over and over again before I actually got an idea of what those minor differences were. Now, the LISST and the regular vacuum tube sounded so similar that there were times when it was really hard to tell any differences between the 2. And that was actually kind of disheartening because I'm a tube girl myself. I did have some question marks around the way vacuum tubes make music sound more realistic, because one song called Underground was supposed to have a very grainy sounding violin because the sound was intended to resemble this radio-esque sound quality. The vacuum tubes made the violin sound less grainy, but the intention of the recording was for it to sound that way. The LISST did not seem to alter what was originally intended in that particular recording. Now, the last thing I did was to select a song that I thought was really good for comparison called Between Twilight, again on the Artemis album. And I matched levels to 79 to 90 decibels to stay within that range because I had actually taken measurements at the concert and found that that was about the range that I was listening to at the concert. And I wanted to ensure that I tested things as closely as possible to the real thing. Overall, there were some things the LISST did that the tubes did not, and things the tubes did that the LISST refused to do. With most of what I listened to, the LISST seemed to add more girth, and the regular vacuum tubes just seemed to smooth things out more, which made me question, in actuality, which one had the more realistic sound. Normally, when people describe the sound of tubes, they describe it as if there were some fairy that were dancing around a sugar plum. They describe solid state as the devil.
I don't ever want you associating with little girls.
Why not, Mama?
Because little girls are the devil.
But the differences between the two are so hard to tell that you would really have to have critics' ears to be able to tell the difference. Once we get to the objective part of the review later in the video, maybe it will shed some light on some stuff for those technical nerds out there that may want to look at the measurements. Now, you're probably all asking yourselves, what about the two solid-state modes? The Freya Plus offers both a passive mode and a differential buffer mode. In comparing the two in the same way I compared the LISST with the vacuum tubes, unlike that comparison, I heard a huge difference switching between the two solid-state modes. On first listen in passive mode, I hated it, but I gave it a chance. And actually, it sounded okay other than the bottom end. Once I started going back and forth between passive mode and differential buffer mode, I actually came to like passive mode better. It's more of a what you hear is what you get type of sound. I had to turn the volume up when switching to differential buffer mode. I guess you could say that overall it had a cleaner sound and it was quote unquote better. It made Lindsay's violin sound more smooth. It made the low end sound more tame, but all of this was at the expense of the sound. And by far, passive mode definitely sounded more realistic and more true to the absolute sound. Differential buffer mode kind of sounded like putting a mute in a trumpet. But listening in differential buffer mode had that smoothness that reminded me of listening in tube mode. And sure enough, listening in tube mode again made me realize that. After having attended the Oklahoma City Philharmonic's rendition of Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto in D major and Pathétique, I wanted to know how close this setup came to sounding like a live orchestra. Listening to a vinyl copy I had of Pathétique, as well as a few orchestral pieces over streaming, I would have been fooled. All of the different configurations the Freya Plus offers depicted a fairly accurate reproduction of an orchestra. And if I would have to pick a winner, I would say that passive mode and vacuum tube mode with vacuum tubes installed would be neck and neck. Passive mode won, though, as far as accuracy is concerned. I just thought that tube mode sounded more pleasing to the ear and sounded absolutely fantastic. And that really shows my lack of bias in this review, because I much rather prefer tube mode with the vacuum tubes than listening in solid state mode. And yet I can say without a doubt that listening in solid state passive mode was the most true to the absolute sound. under $1,100 and the number of features you get with the Freya Plus, this is one of the most affordable and versatile preamps on the market. With the option to listen with tubes or not, or listen with the LISST, you really have options on how you want your listening experience to be. Each mode and configuration option is completely unique. I do think that if you are a solid-state guy or gal and not a tube-person, this product is not for you. If you are a solid-state person that sometimes likes to listen to tubes, this would not be a bad investment though. Now, if you're a tube person that sometimes likes to listen to solid-state, this product is absolutely for you. Although a couple of the configuration options sounded truer to live music than others, I don't really think you can go wrong with this product. And with the LISST, you can get the sound of tubes without having to worry about tubes going out and tube rolling and all of the maintenance they involve. Now, if you like that kind of thing, like I do, then that's another story. I think Schiit Audio had the customer in mind when they made the Freya Plus. With all of the configuration options that they've added to this product, they give you as the customer the ability to tailor the music to the way you want to hear it. So if you're not sure, I would say take the leap. With a 15-day return period and 4 different ways to listen, what are you waiting for? If you already have experience with the Freya Plus and or the LISST, let us know in the comments box. We would love to hear from you. Thank you for watching.